Good morning everyone. This video is intended for my AC 1101 class for the summer term, Conceptual Framework for Financial Reporting and Accounting Standards. The intention is for this video to turn into a video series of my discussion on the framework and the various accounting standards which are covered by the AC 1101 class. So for my students, for you to be able to survive through this video lecture, I encourage you to prepare your notes, to make notes out of the discussions that will be presented from this video. So the coverage of this first video would be an introduction to the conceptual framework and also the first chapter of the framework itself. So for these subjects, students are not expected rather, to have a complete understanding already of the provisions of the standards. But at the very least, students are expected to be familiar already with the objectives and the scopes of the standards, the measurement, presentation, and recognition requirements provided in the standards for the various account titles or the various elements of the financial statements. And aside from the measurement requirements, presentation requirements, and the recognition requirements, we would also endeavor to learn the important disclosures required by each standard. But before we go to the accounting standards itself, it's important for us to talk about the conceptual framework for financial reporting, because basically the framework serves as the core or the basic principle in which the development of other accounting standards are based upon. The assumption here is we start with a framework and expand and evolve out of the framework for us to be able to develop the standards. As a side note, the standards are developed by the International Accounting Standards Board, and which we refer to as the IFRS, which we adapt here in the Philippines and call them as the PFRS, or the Philippine Financial Reporting Standards. So to start, the complete name of the framework is Conceptual Framework for Financial Reporting. It's important, I find it important that students take note of the complete name of the framework, because I have encountered a question before in which the sole issue in the question is whether or not students knew the complete title of the framework. So the question goes like this: what's the complete title of the 2018 framework? And the correct answer should be Conceptual Framework for Financial Reporting. But it would be very confusing because the choices would be very close to the correct answer. For example, other choices in the multiple choice question would be Conceptual Framework for Financial Statements, Conceptual Framework for Financial Reports. But again, as early as now, I want us to be sure that you know that the complete name for the framework is the Conceptual Framework for Financial Reporting. By the way, the latest version of the framework was published on March 2018. So this would be the version that we would be using in our discussion. Also, as a advance warning to the students, the nature of my discussion would be more on my expectations on how the framework and the accounting standards are going to be asked in examinations or even in the board exams. As you should already know by now, the accounting standards are part of the financial accounting and reporting board subject. So the board subject involves theory questions and the problems already. So our focus here would be to prepare you to eventually become capable of asking the theory questions in the board exams. Or for the time being, for you to be prepared the theory questions on the examinations that you will encounter while still in accounting school. So I'm conducting the discussion like this because I believe for you to do well in the examinations and the board exams, you should be able to take care of those questions that are categorized as easy questions. And most of the time, theory questions are the ones that are going to be classified as easy, especially those questions that merely require the students to perform memory recall. I would always emphasize that students should make sure that they get 100% of the questions that are classified as easy. And from what I have observed, many questions would really come from theory questions that are going to be considered as easy. Just say, for example, the title of the framework. That does not require a lot of brilliance on the student's part. That does not require a lot of analytical skills on the part of the students. But it would be a waste of point if you will not be able to get it right, simply because you cannot remember the exact name of the framework. So again, to set things straight, the complete title of the framework is Conceptual Framework for Financial Reporting. So we begin. The function of the conceptual framework for financial reporting, is to describe the objective and the concepts for general purpose financial reporting. As earlier stated, the framework is for the serves as the main principle, the core principle, the main guiding principle in the development of accounting standards. So with the framework, it sets out what should be the objective of general purpose financial reporting. So if the objective is to provide useful financial information, so every standard that will be developed by the IASB should work toward achieving provisions that will result in financial statements that provide financial statement users with useful financial information. And with regard to concepts, the goal here is for there to be a guiding principle on what concepts should be applied. So as regards the concept on materiality, aggregation, measurement, then all the standards should be based on the general principles laid out in the framework. Next would be the purpose of the conceptual framework. This area in the framework is another favorite source of questions in your examinations. You would be asked, which of the following is not a purpose of the conceptual framework? The framework provides three purposes, and you can observe that there's something common among the three, and that is the purpose of the framework is to assist. The framework assists the IASB, assists the preparers of financial reports, and assists all parties who will be using the financial statements. So it should not be very difficult for you to remember what are the purposes of the framework, because they are all to assist. So all we have to remember is who is supposed to be assisted. And the three entities or the three groups that are going to be assisted by the framework is number one, the IASB, as they develop the accounting standards. Second is the preparers of your financial statements. Whenever the standards present the preparers with an option on what policy to use, or in case the standard does not provide any specific provision. The third would be to assist users of the financial statements in understanding the financial reports. So this would be the second common question framework. Which of the following is not a purpose of the framework? So from the questions I have encountered before, the fourth choice would definitely be the wrong answer, and they are going to make it easy because the fourth choice would not even have the word assist. So if you already know that the purpose of the framework is to simply assist these three groups of entities, then it should be very easy for you to identify that the erroneous choice is the fourth choice. So just remember that the purpose of the framework is to assist the IASB, assist the preparers of the financial statements, and assist the users of those financial statements. Now, these four statements are the common statements that will be asked regarding your framework. And this can easily be framed as a multiple choice question. I'll give you these four, and the question would be which of the following statements regarding the conceptual framework is false. And all I've got to do is to change some words in one of these four sentences. So it's very important for you to be familiar with these four statements. So the first one is that the conceptual framework is not a standard. If you're reading this now, then you can simply say that is very easy to remember. But once you are already in the exam, you cannot help but entertain the idea that perhaps the conceptual framework is a standard. But in fact, again, the conceptual framework is not a standard. So why would one think that the framework is a standard? One reason perhaps could be that the framework was issued by the IASB. And if you remember, it is the IASB that develops and issues the IFRS or the PFRS. So if the framework was also issued by the IASB, so one can argue that perhaps the framework is also a standard. But again, let's settle it right now that the framework is not a standard. So if this was a multiple choice question, I will just have to change this statement as the conceptual framework is a standard. So right now you might say, I will not fall for that, but again, during the exam, you would be tempted to entertain the idea that the framework is a standard. Second is the conceptual framework does not override any provisions or requirement in the standard. So that should not be very difficult to remember because again, we have already settled that the framework is not a standard. So here you are, on one hand, the standard, and another publication that is not a standard. So which between the two should be heavier? Which of the two should be followed? Definitely it should be the standard. So if ever there's a conflict between the framework and the standard, it should be the provisions or the requirements of the standard that will prevail. Third would be that the requirements in the standards may depart from the conceptual framework. So it may be very easy for you to say again that the standard should not depart from the framework because in the first place, aren't the standards based on the framework itself? That may be correct, but again, you have to understand that the framework is more of a general guiding principle wherein it may not be specifically applicable to certain elements of the financial statements, wherein the standards are forced to come up with provisions that will be specific to a particular case or transaction in order for the standard to achieve the preparation of useful financial information. So if you are just going to blindly follow the framework and such act may lead to the preparation of financial statements that are no longer useful, then definitely that should not be followed. The ultimate goal is for financial statements to provide useful financial information. So if there's a need to depart from the framework in order for us to prepare financial statements that provide useful financial information, then definitely that path should be undertaken. So that is why it is possible for the requirements of a standard to depart from the conceptual framework. So again, it's very easy for you to commit a mistake from this statement because you can say nga, if the standards are based on the framework, then there should be no reason for a standard to depart from the framework. But again, the explanation there is the principles laid out in the framework may be too general that if they are to be applied for specific events or transactions, useful financial information may no longer be achieved. The overriding criteria here is whether or not we can prepare or we can create or develop useful financial information. That should be the overriding criteria. Last statement would be that the revisions in the framework will not automatically lead to changes in the standards. So just like the current framework, the 2018 framework, there's a significant change in the definition of assets and liabilities, but those changes are not automatically adopted in the standards. The standards themselves must be revised or amended so as to adapt, if needed, the changes in the framework. So one might say that you can actually forego the changes in the framework because you still have to follow the standard. So basically, the framework now would be for the future development of your accounting standards or the revisions of your old accounting standards. So take note, we have already identified 3 common questions for framework and we are still at the introduction portion. The first one is the name of the framework. The complete name is Conceptual Framework for Financial Reporting. Second question is the purpose of the conceptual framework. It is to assist the IASB, assist the preparers of financial statements in cases there are options or in cases no specific provision is provided in the standard. Third is to assist all parties that will be using the financial reports. The third question that we have identified is simply to identify whether certain statements are true or false regarding the framework. Number one, the conceptual framework is not a standard. Second, no provision in the framework will override a requirement in any standard. Third, the standards may depart from the provisions in the conceptual framework. And lastly, revisions in the conceptual framework will not automatically lead changes to the standards. So, the mission of the IASB, although I cannot imagine this statement alone being asked as a multiple choice question, but perhaps as a true or false question. Okay, what is the mission of the IASB? The mission of the IASB is to develop standards that bring three things: transparency, accountability, and efficiency to financial markets around the world. So, from this mission, the foundation of the standards are based on it. So if you remember, the mission of the IASB is to bring transparency, accountability, and efficiency. And if you try to look at the foundation of the standards, it is to contribute to transparency, strengthen accountability, and contribute to economic efficiency. So if we have uniform, if we would be following uniform or common accounting standards, then it would be very easy for us to ask accountability from the preparers of the financial statements. The financial statements themselves would be very transparent for us because we already know how the financial statement should be prepared. So if we will be able to identify instances in which the financial statement was prepared based on the concept not in conformance with the standard, then we will be able to say that there is something wrong with the financial report. And if everyone has an idea on how to prepare these financial statements, then definitely an investor, regardless of where they are in the globe, would be confident in making investment decisions relying on the financial information taken from the reports that are prepared using the accounting standards.